I'm Josh Klein.
And I'm Elise Hugh.
We host a podcast from Accenture called Built for Change.
Every part of every business is being reinvented right now. That means companies are facing brand new pressures to use fast evolving technologies and address shifting consumer expectations.
But with big changes come even bigger opportunities. We've talked with leaders from every corner of the business world to learn how they're harnessing change to totally reinvent their companies.
And how you can do it too.
Subscribe to Built for Change now so you don't miss an episode.
If you like listening to Warriors in Their Own Words, check out our other show, the Medal of Honor podcast. The link is in the show description. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, we'll hear from Captain Harold Sperber. Sperber served in World War II as a Pathfinder co-pilot. It was his job to help fly small paratrooper groups called Pathfinders to landing zones ahead of major missions so that the area could be scouted and marked. In this episode, Sperber describes the mission he had on the night before D-Day.
As a Pathfinder pilot, I started out as a first lieutenant in Sicily, and I got promoted to captain about a year and a half later, and came back to the States and got out of the service and went as civilian. When I went into the 50th Squadron, I was a replacement pilot for the 40 aircrew that was shot down by our Navy by mistake, by the conditions there, the communications, the lack of communications and what have you. And I walked into the tent that in my operations in the 50th Squadron, and a message came in and said, send a pilot to Palermo, Sicily to fly with the Lancasters bombers with the RAF and learn about radar. And I remember one pilot saying to the other pilot, what's radar? In that category. So that's how new it was. And it was classified in the early days. So fortunately, an airplane was delivered in Sicily with the radar system on it, and we took the airplane and flew it to England and started at Cottesmore, England, to start the school and learn how. And mainly it was for the navigators to interpret the radar systems and everything. It was state of the art. In comparison to today, if we had GPS like we have today, it would have been a simple operation. But it took a lot of training. And I flew with Clyde Taylor, who was the aircraft commander. I was the right seat man, co-pilot. And we trained until D-Day together. And our navigator was Preston Corsa. And the important team member in that Pathfinder crew was the navigator, as far as I was concerned, the Pathfinder navigator, who had to give the pilots the directions and learn about all the Lorans and the radars and everything else like that was involved. The question about the pilots, they were selected. Colonel Kresh, Lieutenant Kresh in those days, and Clyde Taylor had flown. Most of these Pathfinder people had been through North Africa, through some of the Sicilian operations and what have you, and they were selected. They were old veterans. They'd been through the malaria days, they'd been through the hepatitis days, the jaundice days, and everything else like the bad food and everything else like that health-wise. But they're also veterans who had been seeing the combat and the problems that could exist. And I've flown all of those missions. I flew flight tests for 13 years. I flew B-26 in Korea, and I had a squadron of forward air control airplanes in Vietnam. So I saw airplanes and pilots from one end to the other. And I would fly with the Pathfinder pilots every day. And we had a card in a Pathfinder airplane that we could fly no matter what the weather, if we felt that we could control it, and if we felt that it was necessary. We could fly to any base, and base commander said, oh, the weather's below minimum, you can't fly. Well, we go fly. So they were good. They were good. As I say, I would fly with them as just as rate them as high as any. We started from North Witham, England, and got our Pathfinder paratroopers. These were the people that had the responsibility of making the jump, securing it, and each one of the Pathfinder paratroopers was weight on top of their weight of 120 to 130 pounds. So it just gives you an example of how much weight these gentlemen had to carry. We loaded up the airplane in North Witham. General Eisenhower came there to say good luck and cheer up the Pathfinder paratroopers. And then we took off at 9 o'clock. We were the second flight of 3. Colonel Crouch was the lead 3, and we were the second. And the reason for the 3 was that if one airplane got shot down, it generally would be the lead airplane because you want to shoot. And we were low altitude. They would shoot from underneath us. And in so doing, if we got shot down, number 2 man could take the lead and do the same job, and with the equipment and everything he had on board. If he got shot down or had a problem, then number 3 could do the same job. So fortunately, in our particular case, I'll go on a little later on this particular point, but we took off, went to Land's End, dropped down to low altitude, and I mean low, around 50 feet and below. We'd actually pick up spray off the seas were high that day, winds, weather. But in developing our flight plan, and also not keeping too much spray coming off our airplanes so that the visibility of our wingmen, the only thing our wingmen could look for was little white lights or blue lights on top of our wing, and it was cupped. So if you were in the right position, you could see the lights. If you were too high or too low or too right or too left, out of formation, you couldn't see very well. And it was dark. So everything went along fine. We went in between the Guernsey and Guernsey Island and the peninsula and ended up just as we started into our climb from the water, you might say, our low-level water flight. So we did this to avoid radar. And as we started up, we got hit. We don't know whether it was a night fighter. And a night fighter couldn't have gone under us before we pulled up. But maybe when he come up there, he might not. We didn't see any tracers from this way, but things were coming up from along the shoreline. Somebody had stirred up the guns all around in that particular case. But it was so hard to tell actually what going on. Our left wing man, Jack Kentner, said he saw something coming up at that time. The engine did not just sputter, and sometimes with a radial engine, you could knock off a cylinder or a valve or anything else like this, and the engine sometimes would just continue to run, or they would sputter, and you see oil pressure drop, or you knew you had an engine problem. But in this case, it was just bingo. There was nothing in that category. So then it was a decision time, a very, very short decision time. We had to say, can we crash straight ahead? Not can we, will we, or how can we avoid everybody being killed in the airplane? Or we were too low for them to bail out. The paratroopers had to be around 400 foot of altitude, and we were less than around 200 at the time. Clyde made the decision to make a right-hand turn into Colonel Crash's position, and I had just checked him out my window, and he was perfect position. So I knew that we had to get underneath him in that category there. And of course, the last thing that a wingman would think of is somebody turning into, especially at night, and especially in a hard turn. And we had to make a pretty hard turn to get to a safe position that we could recover from. Now, the engines of a Pratt & Whitney engine that is equipped in that airplane is about, I think it's 15 seconds for maximum power before you have to have the engine inspected. And any longer than that, it was a matter of engine change. You're going to ruin the engine. It's just not designed for that long of high power. So we ended up, anyway, making the turn, just going past some houses and buildings. I could see in the lights that before we flew over top, couldn't see, but when we were down so low, you could almost horizontally see a light there. And, of course, the action that was going on above them, I'm sure we woke up the whole coastline. See, we were loaded very, very heavy. Each paratrooper was weighing about, minimum of 250, 300 pounds. The flight crews had flak suits on, and we had a flak helmet. When you add everything up together, we were probably in a category of 5,000 pounds heavy. So we needed both engines to fly safely, like say, and climb and what we had to do. So the obvious thing was full power on the good engine, make the turn, get down over the water, and hope that we could maintain altitude over the water. And actually getting ground effect or water effect, that's how low we got. In fact, is the running engine would hit the top of the waves at times, and you hear the prop go clack, 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 clack like that, and hitting that low altitude. Meantime, we had to say, get everything out of this airplane that's heavy and non-essential. So they were throwing things out of the airplane like you couldn't believe, and you could hear them almost hit the water and go along like that. One of the things that the paratroopers told us after we got back to mainland was they had landmines on the airplane. And one paratrooper said to the next paratrooper, "Hey, landmine, go it on down to the next person and throw it out the door." This man says, "Landmine," and he took the landmine and just threw it from about the second throw out to the door that was maybe about a foot clearance and got it out. But then it was a matter of all the stuff that our crew chief from the airplane threw out, of all the extra equipment that the paratroopers had, and their sidearms, everything that they had, including their parachutes. And at last, they were too low to ever jump out. So they threw even their parachutes out. And that made the airplane a little bit better control. And then we had that full power on those engines for about 20, 25 minutes. And we were saying, what's our next decision? Are we going to try to land at Guernsey Island or Jersey Island, which is, by the way, dairy lands. Even today, England gets their raw milk from those islands. Very rich in that category, named after Jersey and Guernsey hosting milk cows. But they also had fences made out of stone, and to make a landing there would have been disastrous too. So the next thing was, we're going to take each decision at a time. And we kept our paratroopers informed what was going on, our crew chief. And then we decided, can we make England? And to get these guys home. Our next problem was our radar operator, Corsa, would look in his radar screen and he'd see something. It might have been seagulls, or could have been a submarine or a small boat or something like this pop up. The seas were going like this. And ended up anyway that we go along, and I saw a ship, a faint deal of a ship out there, and it turned out to be the HSM Intrepid, and a destroyer. And I was born and raised on Lake Erie, but Clyde Taylor, who was our aircraft commander, Clyde was in the Navy 3 years before he went to Air Force or flight school, Army Air Corps in those days. And he was familiar with bigger boats than I was. Anyway, it ended up that we decided that, hey, we're going to try that there. If the engines are still going and everything else like that, we'll try to make England. The only problem was we it was using so hard of the engine, everything, the glow of the engine overheating, we hardly needed the light in the cockpit. It was that hot. We finally had enough nerve to say, well, let's try it and see, bring back a little power and see if there's any left, like pull the throttle back up again. And there was no response practically between low and high power settings. So it's a matter of, we're going to ditch. So we said to our crew chief and told our paratroopers, prepare to ditch. And here's a ship out here like this. Now, the only thing you didn't want to do is make a turn into the ship, because this would happen in Sicily. When they turned into the ship like this, their guns, hey, what are you guys doing out here? You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be someplace else like this. And here you are making a combat threat to us. They had their guns on us. And they said if we'd have turned another 20 degrees, they'd have shot us down for sure. So we had our full day on that category. But anyway, we ditched the airplane. To ditch the airplane, Clyde and I had talked about this because we were over water quite a bit. We knew we were going to be in combat problems. So we made procedures on what we were going to do if we had to ditch. We knew the winds generally and the westerly winds, and we said, well, we'll head into the wind so we get the lowest impact ground speed, water speed. And the next thing was, are we going to use flaps? How are we going to do it? So we had everything set up exactly where we wanted it. And the next thing we had turned the landing light on, by the way. We didn't want to because of obvious reasons. But to see what we were going to do, we had turned on the landing light. Turned on the landing light, and the next thing was a wall. Not just a little wave, but a wall of water come over the top of us. And that's all last I remember for a little bit. I lost my eyesight, but I could hear. I could hear the airplane moaning and groaning, and like it was just tearing apart. And I thought, oh, we've really screwed up this landing. And I said, then I could feel this sort of thing. And I thought to myself, are we on our way to heaven or hell, or are we floating, And I thought to myself, I hope we're floating. And pretty soon I could see nothing but green water. And second, what are we looking at here? Well, the landing light still stayed on, and the batteries of a C-47 are run underneath you. 2 big batteries underneath here, and they didn't tear loose, but so quickly we turned off all electrical. We don't want salt water with electrical on, naturally, because had we had gasoline all around the airplane, why, disaster. So we checked each other in front, and I thought the front of the airplane windows and everything would come in. It didn't. Clyde and I were okay. Clyde got up from his seat and went back. And being an old Navy man, he wanted to make sure that the life raft, which I think was a 5 or 7 man life raft, and he went back to help. I opened the top hatch above there, and of course, we didn't have any power on because of the obvious reasons. I took my flashlight and stood up on the seat and was about this high off from the seat, and I could flash to the destroyer. Well, one thing I always remember, dit, da, da, da is SOS. But a dit also indicates a flash, like you're shooting, and I remembered I did a lot of dashes rather than dits, I think. But it ended up anyway that this big destroyer comes sailing up there within 10 yards of where we were, stopped right side of us, and really blanked the winds and the sea from where we were. A fabulous bit of seamanship. And threw a landing net over, and a man up on the top threw me a line. And I was able to hold the airplane against the destroyer, and the guys got out of the back of the airplane. They would get in the life vest, and of course, it was only set for the crew of 5. So one guy go in, and one guy would have to go to the side. And it was, of course, the water was so cold. Think June up in Lake Erie, we'd go out and swim. In the June time, the water was fairly warm, but it was cold. And it ended up that the guys got over on the side of the landing net and out, and I'm holding this line yet. And the last thing that a destroyer wants to do in a combat zone is sit there. They rely on speed, and they want to be up to 20, 30 knots to avoid everything. And the next thing was they started the screws up. The airplane started sinking underneath me, and I decided I have not got time to go back to the back way. I went over the top, and I swung from the top of the destroyer over there. 1 minute, you might be sitting right next to them. The next minute, you might be looking up like, it seemed like 50 feet on the seas in that category. And I had leather gloves, fortunately, on it. Otherwise, I'd torn my skin right off my hands, I'm sure, because of the rope and everything else like this. But as he turned the screws of the big destroyer on, it just sucked the airplane underneath, and it was gone. I swung over. I caught the last leg of the landing net, and they pulled me along for a little while, and it was pulling up the landing net at the same time. And one of the seamen looked down, and he probably thought it was a pretty heavy landing net, pulling up, and he says, "By me, there's a Yank down there yet." And I still remember him saying that. We got on board, checked everybody over. I had a little, I don't know, they hit my side of my head in slamming against the hard shell of the destroyer, or I did it on with the helmet on, I don't know. But anyway, I had a little scratch, I call it. But with seawater, it looked like blood coming down my face, like I was really hurt, and the seamen are in charge of medics there. Remember the old days, and the medical man on the old ships, if you had a problem, they'd saw your legs off your arm. With the carpenter and I said, "No thanks, I'm fine," So he said to me, "Well, if you don't want me to do anything there," he says, "You drink this." And he brought a nice big white mug, navy mug of hot buttered rum. And it was so cold and everything else like it, I don't drink. And I took one sip of just to help him, and boy, it was good. But I gave it to my navigator, who was sitting there shaking like it as cold as could be. And he still remembers the last that fight, that part that, and poor navigators cannot see what's going on outside. And so it was hard for them. And so we almost ran out of fuel. But they also told us that if they could not have picked us up within 20 minutes, they wouldn't even come out. So that's another thing. Exposure, even in June, it was cold water. And besides that, we only had enough life rafts for the 5 crew members, you might say. So anyway, I remember they put us in a room about a 12 by 12 because, one, they didn't want to lose us after they got us. Normally, the biggest crews they probably would pick up might be 8, 9, 10 or something like that on a B-24 or something like this, and they're not used to. We had 18 plus 5, 23 people on board, and none of us were hurt. And anyway, they put it in, and all night long, this was from about midnight, 12:15, all night long, was sailing through this season. Destroyer, as you know, doesn't go over the waves, it goes through them. They kept us in there at night, and when the morning light came in, we could see the whole invasion system and everything else like this, and it was a fantastic deal. About noon, 1 o'clock, a PT boat, a rescue boat, pulled up on to the ship and said, we saluted and says, "Goodbye, Intrepid. Thank you for hauling us in," and headed off for this little PT boat. Now, they got 2 50 calibers on the top. That's the only thing they have for defense. And they have 2 engines, big Rolls-Royce Berlin engines, and 2 screws. And he had shut one engine down because it could only go in idle and up and down. And the poor paratroopers were so sick, they took a hell of a ride going all the way through all the problems that we had. And then with the destroyer all night, and then with this PT boat, we finally got into Southampton Harbor, the slip there, and then he started the other engine up, and then he showed us, hey, that destroyer isn't so fast, about 50 miles an hour, I think, for short distance. Got in there, they gave us British battle jackets and British clothing. We were sopping wet naturally with salt water and what have you. Put us in a place where we get a shower and cleaned up, and treat us wonderfully. But I was hungry. We were all hungry. And I looked outside, and a lady was in a canteen, like a Red Cross deal, selling tea and crumpets. And I said, could I have a tea and crumpets, please? And she says, Yankee, what are you doing in that British uniform? I only said 2 words to her, Amazing how they could interpret us. Next day, we slept there the night. The next morning, we put in lorries, and we got back to our base. Paratroopers, bless their hearts. I don't know whatever happened to them, whether next day they went on and everything else. But I went from there. But next day, I was back in the air again. And we went on and picked up wounded from the peninsula, Cherbourg, and back over. And we went on to Bastogne and through all of the other 2 years I spent over there.
Instacart helps you get beer and wine delivered in as fast as an hour. So, whether you need to fill the cooler for tailgate season or fill your glass for Pinot by the fire season, you can save time by getting fall sips delivered in just a few clicks. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply. Must be 21 or over for alcohol delivery where available. Instacart. Add life to cart.
I'm Josh Klein.
And I'm Elise Hugh.
We host a podcast from Accenture called Built for Change.
Every part of every business is being reinvented right now. That means companies are facing brand new pressures to use fast evolving technologies and address shifting consumer expectations.
But with big changes come even bigger opportunities. We've talked with leaders from every corner of the business world to learn how they're harnessing change to totally reinvent their companies.
And how you can do it too.
Subscribe to Built for Change now so you don't miss an episode.
I had 2 emotions. One emotion was we didn't complete our primary mission. But our second side of the story was we were so happy that no one was hurt or killed in that situation. Normally at night in those conditions, I'm not sure of these facts, but I know others went down that night or during that D-Day period. And many of them lost everybody on board. So in all, my emotions was twofold. One, hey, why did we get hit right there? Why couldn't we go on another 5-10 miles into St. Mary-Glise, which is our target, and drop our troops? And with all the weight on, even with one engine, we might have been able to make it back with no problem at all. But on the other side of the coin, it was to be 1,000,000 to 1 maybe. But we made it and got everybody back, and they went to fly, both of us again, and they to drop again. I think the way I felt about the whole thing was that every target assigned to the Pathfinders for their drop zone target and everything else was made and met and completed 100%. The rest, as far as what we did that night, I just wish we could have got another 10, 15 miles from that airplane at that time. But it wasn't to be. We were lucky that it didn't blow up. Now, we had one other case in my original squadron that of 4 airplanes, this airplane here hit a wire, blew up. These 2 airplanes here rolled over like this and crashed and killed all 3 airplanes here. This airplane in a diamond went into a loop and blew up on the top like this. The only survivor was a crew chief who got blown out and his chute opened by the impact of the explosion. So it's one of those things that had we had a couple of seconds or more one way or the other, could we have done anything differently? And I would say no. The thing about Clyde Taylor and we knew each other very well. We'd flown to each other for about 4 months solidly. Our navigator, Preston Course, was one of the best. And we're selected to lead the element. I would go anytime, even today, with all I have about, 10,000 hours of flying time when I retired from the Air Force, and I flew everything from small helicopters to even I've been in B-52s through the flight test of 104s and from one end to the other, you might say. And even today, I could, in my sleep, reach up and grab the throttles of a C-47 and the props and the mixtures and everything else about it. It's just still, it's something that stayed in my mind such a long, long time to feel the respect for that airplane. It's built right here, in Long Beach. And of course, later on, they produced them they built 10,000 C-47s, and Eisenhower claimed it to be one of the best workhorses of the war. And the other thing I want to mention, I'm glad you asked me the question. The question there again is, how about the paratroopers? If you had paratroopers that dropped around you in any place in this country, any place that you were, nobody slept. Nobody slept until they found out all those paratroopers were gone or secured or what have you. Because a paratrooper, he's not carrying a 100-pound bomb or a 1,000-pound bomb. I felt they were more like bombs. They could do more. They could move. They could go 1,000 feet, 3 miles, or anything else like this. If they missed the target, they could move. They had intelligence. They could hide. They could be scared. You never knew where they were. And they carried hand grenades, and they had landmines, and everything of this nature, not to really kill tanks and things like this, but they were there. So very, very powerful, secure fighting men. I think we were very, very, very lucky that we all got out of it, yes. And Clyde Taylor, by the way, that was his last flight. I never saw Clyde Taylor again. Sorry to say, because he went back to the States and I stayed over there and I was aircraft commander the rest of the time. But the thing about it was that after you go through what Clyde went through and everything else like that, and another problem in this particular case is that people don't realize the number of people you have wounded, number of people you have fatalities, and the next thing was there's I've never seen any figures on deep depression, battle fatigue, that sort of thing. It's a number that people don't realize, and it can go on for years and years. And Clyde spent approximately 20 years in a depression problem. I don't know, well, it's cumulative or just what, but it is another part of the system.
That was Captain Harold Sperber. To hear more about the Pathfinders, listen to last week's interview with Pathfinder pilot Major Richard Jacobson. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Rule-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloia, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
Hello, this is Gary Chahot welcoming you to check out the French History Podcast. Our main show covers the history of France from the first humans until present. If you liked Mike Duncan's The History of Rome and wanted a similar program covering the land of beauty, culture, and love, we are exactly that. We also host world-renowned scholars who have delivered guest episodes on their specialties, including 18th century pirates, revolutionary booksellers in 20th century Paris, the special friendship between the Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson, and numerous others. Learn what you love and listen to the French History Podcast today.